doing my YouTube, I thought that this was going to be a way to make more friends, to become part of the community and get to know people and all that stuff. But I realized that that's not going to work because I'm not that likable and I really don't give a damn whether people like me that much anymore. So I just decided that, this is just going to be for me and a backup because I write it out on a piece of paper, but sometimes things can get lost. And with me, twice as easy as anybody else. Also, when it comes down to it, I need practice in my speaking and stuff, so this is a way to help me pronounce my words better and stuff like that and just to get the words out there. I've always had a hard time expressing myself, so this actually has helped me a lot. And I've noticed that in classes when I have to speak out and say things, it has helped me be able to say what I want to say. So this is all a positive thing for me, but I've always felt like the community part of this YouTube world was always a negative. And I've always had issues with making friends or getting people to want to talk to me, at least. And I don't know. It's just always been that kind of way for me, so this world really sucks. But this is just for me, and I really don't give a damn if anybody watches this anymore.
So that being said, today is my March wrap-up for books, and I read 15 books in total. So we're just gonna have to get into this. The first book of the month was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I started this in February and finished it in this month. It took me about a week and a half to finish this book just because it is pretty lengthy, it's dense, and there's a lot of information to get through.
The basic synopsis of the story is that of Walter Hartwright, who is an art teacher who gets a job teaching these two sisters, and he has to move in order to teach them. And the night before he moves, he meets a woman in white in the evening when he's walking home from saying goodbye to his family. And it's very weird because she seems to have a secret and she's just very nervous and acting kind of strangely. He helps her out, and the next day when he meets Laura, he tells Marion about it, and it leads them on this crazy adventure that has these twists and turns, and in the midst of all of that, Walter falls in love with Laura.
The romance in this book is subtly told and is not the focal point, which of course makes sense since this is mostly about the woman who is in white and the connection that she has to Laura and that family and all this crazy stuff that happens because of his meeting with her. For the most part, I did like the writing. It was really well done overall, but he did explain more than show, and I know that was because at that time this kind of narrative was new, and so he felt he had to explain, but at the same time I almost felt like he wasn't giving his readers credit that they were smart enough to actually know how to understand. So there's a toss-up between I get it, but at the same time it was a little bit frustrating. This book was also told in multiple perspectives, and overall I really loved that. I loved it in this book. He did it really well, but Bosco's perspective was so unnecessary and very repetitive to the storyline, so he could have done to cut his out. I understand why he wanted to do it because he wanted us to know Bosco and his side, but at the same time it was basically telling us everything that we already knew, even about his own side of it. But overall, each of the characters were very realistic, and you couldn't really emphasize with many of the characters because of the time period and the way things were done. So that really didn't drive the story or make you like the story. What really drew me into the story and kept me reading was the mystery and the romance and just wanting to know what would happen if it was all going to work out. Not only was this a mystery and a romance, there was a bit of a fantastical side to it for me. I felt at times that there was this weird, was this a ghost moment? Is this even happening? And I really liked that because it added a bit of a twist and kept you going with the story. And it was just so wonderfully done. He did this story really well overall. The other thing that was very interesting about this book was Colin's commentary on the society of that time and his argument between feminism and anti-feminism. At times you could feel him arguing for and sometimes arguing against. But from the introduction, I have a sort of opinion that he was a feminist and that he believed that women had the right to their own lives and that it was a right for a man to control them in any sort of way. So it was very interesting to see that subtle commentary. A 4 stars.
The next book is A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is a library book, so I don't have it anymore. But this book is basically about clones and the way that they're being used and the fight for freedom and sort of stuff like that.
I did not like the writing in this book at all, and I really tried to get past that. I tried to read this book so many times. I kept repeating sentences and trying to push myself to the next chapter, but it was a big old failure for me. The writing was such a huge issue for me. I couldn't get past the very drone-ish, very, I don't know, very research paper-ish kind of a thing that was happening to it. There was a lot of information being thrown at me. I just didn't really care for that. It was just too much information all at once, and it was very scientific, and I can't understand it enough to be interested in it. The way the story was told was also just not my box of chocolates. And if it was written in a different style, I probably would have liked the story better. Sorry to say, this book was not for me. I didn't have patience with the writing or the way the story was being told, and all the information that was being thrown at me was just way too much for me. But I think that anybody who is really into this kind of science would probably enjoy it. So I gave Brave New World 2 stars. The next book that I read was an ebook, and it's The Iron Butterfly by Shonda Hahn.
And this book is about, who's to really know, right? It's very weird. This girl is in a prison of sorts, and she's being experimented on and tortured, basically. And she finds a way to escape, and she finds herself in the city, and there's magic and all this weird stuff.
Another book that I really did not like, and here's why. Although the premise of this story was interesting, and if it had been handled well, I might have liked it, but as I said, it was not executed well at all. And also, this is a YA book, so I expected it to sound more like a young adult book, but it really came off like a children's story, and I really don't appreciate that. I already have issues with YA as it is. Don't make it worse by not even sounding like a young adult book. I do understand that she is a children's book author, so this was like her transition book, I guess, but she should have taken more time and looked at it and had more people look at it, because it really didn't work out at all. And I mean, the story and the writing and everything did not work out. And why I'm saying that is because the writing was horrible. The grammar was bad. There's unfinished sentences. There was bad grammar and spelling all over the place. It was very, very messy. And for somebody who's been writing already for a while, that's something that should have been caught. You know, she should have been able to see that and correct it, and where were the editors and all this kind of thing. So where I'm saying that this almost seems like she was a first-time writer is because the writing and the dialogue was very amateuric and stilted, and was just really drove me up the wall, I must say. The story itself did not captivate me at all. It was very confusing and all over the place, and I couldn't understand what was happening, and nothing was being explained. Halfway through the book, nothing was explained still. Also, Talia as a character, she's the girl that escapes, was very unrealistic. She's just escaped from years and years of being tortured and automatically falls in love with a guy. And I get that there's this whole being attached to the first person you meet who's nice to you kind of thing, but this was way over the board. And the fact that she's been tortured, you don't really see the effects of it on her at all. Never throughout the book. For somebody who's being tortured, she's very well off in her mindset, and I don't think anybody would actually be that well in her mind after being tortured. So I really couldn't get behind her as a person.
She was just like a superhero. No, not real, right? But she's not supposed to be a superhero, so.
Overall, this book was a huge disappointment for me. Thankfully, I did not buy it because it was like the worst book I've read in a long while. So I'm pretty sure you all can guess, but I gave it 1 star. The next book is Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk.
And this is a library book that I actually tried. So this book is about Tyler and the Fight Club that he creates. And the narrator of the story meets him, and Tyler takes him on this crazy whirlwind of a journey through the Fight Clubs and all that stuff.
Right off the bat, I was captivated, and mainly because of this sentence. Tyler gets me a job as a warder. After that, Tyler's pushing a gun in my mouth and saying, the first step to eternal life is you have to die. That sentence was amazing. It's one of those rare sentences that completely captivate you from the very get-go and makes you want to get to the end to find out what happened. This book puts you in the mind of the narrator right away. You do not know the narrator's name, you just know that he is Tyler's friend, and you know that he meets Tyler and things go from there. This book felt very stream of consciousness. I'm not sure if that's what you would call it, but we were in his mind and we were hearing his thoughts, and it felt very much like we were in his mind listening to him talking and reminiscing and trying to figure out how he got from that point to that point. What was really interesting for me is that I've always had a bit of an issue with stream of consciousness, but Chuck Palahniuk did an amazing job in making it so that it was readable and it was interesting to read, and it kept you into the story itself. The story was very understandable. You could understand what was happening and you didn't feel clogged down by the narrator's thoughts. The story does come off as being all over the place, but if you stick through it, when you get to the end, you'll see how everything ties in together, and the reality and that moment where everything clicks is just amazing. I loved every moment of reading this book because I knew there was something going to happen that was going to just blow me away, and it did. The thing is that now that I'm looking back at the book and the way it was told and all this stuff, there were so many clues all over the place that would have, if I was a psychologist or if I was just paying closer attention, I would have known right off the bat. I was definitely caught up in the world and the story, and it didn't matter that the language was very crude and there was dirty language all over the place, but it kind of added to that atmosphere and the way that Tyler and the narrator thought and felt and dealt with their world. Overall, this book was dark and engrossing to read, and I will definitely be going back to it and see what more I can get from it, because I feel like there is so much more that you can get at reading it over again. Then I read the collected poems of Emily Dickinson, and this is a reread for me, and I absolutely love it. As you can tell, there's so many things in here that really captivate me. Wisdom is more becoming viewed at distance than at hand. Remembrance has a rear and front. 'Tis something like a house. It has a garret also for refuse in the mouth. Besides, the deepest cellar that ever makes things viewed. Look to it by its spasms, ourselves be not pursued. I just love the way that she wrote her poetry. It was very beautiful, yet I could understand what she was saying, which I've always had a hard time when it came to poems and poetry. Just that sometimes you feel that there's something deeper to it and you're trying to figure it out. But these poems were very relatable to my life and to the way I view things, and Emily Dickinson and I are kindred spirits. Then I read It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini.
And this is about a young man who is in a very pressurized school that expects a lot from you, and finds himself reeling downward into depression and wanting to kill himself. But before he can do it, he puts himself in a psych ward.
I think what really made me interested into the story was not the story itself, but the fact that it felt like I was reading Vizzini's experience in the psych ward, because 5 days before he started writing this book, he had been in a psych ward.
I find this story that realistic, and I didn't really think that the whole romance part was very necessary to the story. If he had left it out, I would have liked this story very much more. But I really did like feeling like I was getting to know the author through Craig's story, and I felt like this was more nonfiction than fiction because of that. So overall, I really liked his writing. It was enjoyable, and it was beautifully described. I commend him on his writing.
Further books plus a part of a book during that. The second book in the Spring Break Readathon that I read was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I talked about this in my other wrap-up for that, so I'm not going to go into details about that. Then I also talked about The Casual Vacancy, which I absolutely loved. So you can go check the wrap up for that. And then I started The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and I finished that. Also, I will go back to talking about this after I tell you the other 2 books that I read. And the 4th book that I read in the spring break readathon was The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom, and All But My Life, a memoir. For The Count of Monte Cristo, I did not talk about this book in there because I didn't finish it, so I will talk about it here. This book is a reread for me, and reading it again reminded me why I fell in love with it the first time. I absolutely and positively loved this book. It is amazing. The story is complex, and the fact that it happens in the span of 30 years, yet it doesn't feel that long of a story, just shows how amazing Alexandre Dumas is as an author. It is thrilling and engrossing, and it completely reels you in very, very quickly. Then I tried to read The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley.
This book is about Karen McClellan, who is a best-selling author, and she's trying to write this book that deals with a Scottish storyline, and apparently there might be more truth than fiction to it.
Let's say, I was very, very disappointed and sad that I did not like this, because I've been wanting to read this for years, and I finally got my hands on it, and I was so excited, and then it fell flat.
Flat. The pancake.
And why that is, and why I could not finish this, is because, 1, the way that she described everybody else's physical appearance but Carrie's really frustrated me. I was never able to really imagine the way that Carrie looked because she never described her in any shape or form, except for her personalities. Also, every time she felt like she had to put all of her characteristics out all at once, which was so annoying. Spread it out. Also, she felt that she had to explain things that were self-explanatory. It's just frustrating. The writing was frustrating, and it felt very amateuric for somebody who, this book, I don't believe was her first book written. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but if this isn't her first book, the fact that she was actually going to go back in time and tell you the story, I felt that it was very necessary for her to give you a history lesson of what the past was about, when we would find out anyways through the other person's story who she was talking about. So that was a major negative for me, because it would have become very repetitive because of that. Overall, I just really wasn't into the story as I thought I was going to be. The writing was really amateuric, and the interest fell flat because she piled all this stuff when if she had spread it out and let the past tell a story instead of trying to give us a history lesson, maybe I would have liked it better.
The next book is Way Found by Heather Blumenhoff, and it's a sort of reread. I say that because when I read it the first time, I didn't exactly read all of it. I read partway and then gave up, which is why I still have it, because I bought this book so I wasn't willing to give up on it. Also, I knew that I probably would like it was another reread, and I was, because I finished it this time. So, this book is about 2 girls who go missing, and the secrets that a certain family has that could be damaging in the search for their children.
This is Gudenkauf's debut novel, and I'll give her credit because it was really well done. It drew me into the story and kept me on the edge of my seat. She can tell a good story, but there were a lot of mistakes, which is pretty natural for someone who just started writing. This is her first book, so it's only to be expected that it's not going to be as good. And I'm going to be reading more of her books, so I will see if her writing gets better.
A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Morrow. I tried to really finish this, and here's the reason why. One of the main characters, Sandra, was such a bitch. I actually did not finish this book, and the reason why is that Sandra, one of the main characters, is a complete and utter bitch. I felt that Anthony Morrow wanted us to sympathize with her, and that hopefully we will see change in her, but when I looked ahead, I noticed she didn't even really change. Not at all. Not really. And even though she helps us, though she helps the man and the girl, she really doesn't change. She doesn't stop being a bitch. And that really pissed me off because the character really didn't grow or didn't change at all. And if this author wanted you to care for her at all, that had to happen. She needed to be developed a little bit better. Actually, she needed to be developed a whole lot more. She needed someone to slap her across the face and tell her to grow up a little bit. Just because you have it prone in your life doesn't mean that there isn't other people who are right next to you who have their own issues. She's just so frustrated because here's this girl who just lost her father and this man whose wife is dealing with dementia and just not even there anymore. And all she has is she's a big old baby. Her sister is missing, yes, but I have a feeling that it was her own fault for that. And it's just, especially because she was in America. She could have stayed in America. She chose to come back to Russia. She chose this life, and yet she's acting like a bitch to everybody else and taking it out on everybody else, especially this child, which makes me even more angry because how dare you talk to a child like that, especially a child who's going through a traumatic situation. Whew, that was a whole lot of stuff. The writing, although I liked it a little bit, the foreshadowing was very obvious and blunt, and it really took away from the story. Also, there really wasn't much of a plot, so.
The last book that I read this month is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro.
And this is a scientific book, sort of, and it's about these friends who are reunited, and the memories that come out of it.
Basically, this is a book about Kathy, who is reminiscing about her past, and there's not much meat to this story. You feel him going back and forth through their stories, just to kind of make you feel like there is, but there really isn't. And the fact that there's this whole world where there's donors and carers and all this stuff, yet he never really talks about it. There's no focus on it. And if he had done that, if he had made it about what was going on in this world and the fight that should have been happening between all of this and the fact that there's something very wrong about it, yet there's really nothing that's being focused on it, was just not there. And if he wanted to add that special something with that world, then he should have focused on it, but he never really did. It was really frustrating, and the thing is that I felt that same frustration when I watched the film, because it was very confusing watching the film, and I thought that reading the book would actually help that, but no, nothing was really helped out in this at all. His writing, if it was better, I would have liked it. The story, if it had actually had a focal point and a plot to it, I would have liked it. So I had a halfway good month for reading, but the end of the month was not as good as I was hoping for, and I think a lot of that had to do with my mood. But the books that I gave back ratings for deserved it, I must say. So for the book that I say is my most favorite for the month would have to be All But My Life, a memoir, and my least favorite would have to be The Iron Butterfly.